What if one of the world's most famous rainforests wasn't just wilderness, but the remains of a carefully designed human landscape? For decades, the Amazon was described as untouched, sparsely populated, and largely shaped by nature alone. But new evidence suggests something very different. Using airborne laser technology, researchers have uncovered vast, interconnected settlements hidden beneath the forest canopy. Settlements that challenge everything we thought we knew about pre-Columbian societies. And the most surprising part isn't what was found. It's how organized, intentional, and urban it all appears to be. For most of modern history, the Amazon basin was seen as a place that simply couldn't support large, complex societies. The soil was considered poor, the environment was viewed as too unpredictable, and long-term urban planning was assumed to be impossible. According to earlier academic consensus, pre-Hispanic communities in the Amazon were thought to be small, isolated, and short-lived, groups adapting to the forest rather than shaping it. But that assumption came from one major limitation. Dense jungle makes it extremely difficult to see what lies beneath, which meant archaeology in the Amazon was, for a long time, working with an incomplete picture. That picture began to change with a technology designed not for archaeology, but for mapping terrain. Lidar, short for light detection and ranging, uses laser pulses fired from aircraft to measure the shape of the ground below. Crucially, those lasers can pass through gaps in vegetation. When the data is processed, the forest canopy can be digitally removed, revealing the landscape underneath with remarkable precision. According to the study published in Nature, researchers applied LiDAR scanning to a region in southwestern Bolivia, an area associated with the pre-Hispanic Casarabe culture. What emerged was not a scattering of small sites. It was a system. Large settlements, smaller satellite communities, causeways stretching for kilometers, canals, reservoirs, and engineered terrain, all connected, all planned, and all invisible before the lasers revealed them. Here's where the story becomes especially interesting. The settlements uncovered in the Bolivian Amazon do not resemble dense stone cities like those of the Andes or Mesoamerica. Instead, researchers describe them as low-density urbanism. This means populations spread across wide areas, connected by infrastructure, rather than concentrated in tight city centers. Think of it less like a single-walled city and more like an integrated network. Large central sites featured monumental platforms and U-shaped structures. Smaller settlements surrounded them at regular intervals. Raised roads linked communities, even across wetlands and seasonal flood zones. According to the researchers, this suggests long-term planning, coordinated labor, and shared cultural systems. In other words, urban organization adapted to the rainforest. One of the most significant findings involves water management. The Amazon is defined by extremes, intense rainfall followed by seasonal flooding. Rather than resisting this, pre-Hispanic inhabitants appear to have engineered around it. LiDAR data reveals canals, reservoirs, and raised agricultural areas designed to control water flow. These features suggest a deep understanding of local ecology. Instead of depleting the environment, these societies likely modified it in sustainable ways, enhancing productivity without large-scale deforestation. According to publicly available interpretations of the data, this challenges the long-held idea that the Amazon was a pristine wilderness before European contact. Not untouched, but carefully managed. A common question follows naturally. If these societies were so organized, why don't we see massive stone ruins? The answer may lie in materials and environment. Construction appears to have relied heavily on earthworks, platforms, mounds, and raised areas, rather than stone architecture. Over centuries, vegetation reclaimed these features. What remained was subtle. Flattened terrain, unnatural symmetry, patterns only visible from above. Without LiDAR, much of this would still be invisible today. This means the absence of stone monuments does not imply the absence of complexity. It simply reflects a different architectural tradition. According to the study, Some of the largest settlements in the region covered several square kilometers. The road networks alone extended for dozens of kilometers. This suggests populations far larger and more stable than previously assumed. It also implies social coordination across generations. Urban planning on this scale doesn't happen overnight. It requires shared knowledge, consistent leadership or governance systems, and cultural continuity, all of which point to societies that were not temporary or marginal, but deeply established. This isn't just a story about the past. It changes how we understand human interaction with fragile ecosystems. The idea that dense human populations are incompatible with rainforest environments may not be accurate. According to researchers, these societies demonstrate a model of landscape management that worked for centuries. That raises important questions. What knowledge was lost? What practices could inform modern sustainability efforts? And how many other regions remain unexplored simply because they're hidden from view? Only a fraction of the Amazon has been scanned with Lidar. And even within surveyed areas, analysis is ongoing. This suggests that what we're seeing now may be just the beginning. Entire networks could still be undiscovered, quietly resting beneath the canopy. Not legends, not speculation, but structures waiting for the right tools to be seen. What makes this discovery even more compelling is how quietly it rewrites the story. There was no dramatic collapse carved into stone, no obvious ruins rising above the trees, no single moment that announced itself as history-changing. Instead, the evidence waited patiently, blended into the forest, until the right method came along to notice it. And when it did, it forced researchers to reconsider not just one culture, but an entire framework for understanding human development in tropical environments. For a long time, complexity was associated with visibility. Stone cities, rigid grids, monumental buildings that dominate the skyline. If those features weren't present, the assumption followed that societies must have been small or loosely organized. But what this landscape reveals is a different logic, one where permanence didn't depend on stone and where visibility wasn't the goal. The people who lived here built in ways that made sense for their environment. Earth instead of masonry, elevation instead of enclosure, connectivity instead of density. And over time, those choices allowed their settlements to dissolve back into the forest without erasing their underlying structure. This subtlety is part of why the discovery is so significant. It shows that complexity doesn't always announce itself loudly. Sometimes it hides in plain sight, embedded in patterns rather than monuments. Another detail that stands out is consistency. The settlements uncovered follow recurring layouts. Roads align in deliberate directions. Distances between sites appear intentional rather than random. These are not traits of accidental growth. They point toward shared planning principles, passed across communities and generations. That implies communication, shared standards, possibly even regional coordination. And while the exact social organization remains a topic of ongoing research, the physical evidence suggests cooperation at a scale that's hard to ignore. Building raised causeways across flood-prone terrain isn't a small task. Maintaining canals over decades requires collective effort. Aligning settlements across kilometers implies agreement and continuity. All of this suggests societies that were stable enough to think long-term. It also invites a reevaluation of what urban really means. If cities are defined only by density and stone architecture, then much of human history falls outside the category. But if urbanism is understood as organized space, infrastructure, and social coordination, then these Amazonian settlements clearly qualify. They represent an alternative path, one shaped by ecology rather than imposed despite it. This is where the discovery becomes especially relevant today. Modern discussions about sustainability often frame dense urban centers as the only efficient model for large populations. Yet here is evidence of a different approach, one that spread people out while keeping them connected, reducing pressure on any single location. It wasn't a perfect system, and it wasn't eternal, but it worked long enough to leave a measurable imprint on the landscape. And that imprint forces us to question another assumption. that the forest we see today is purely natural. According to many researchers, parts of the Amazon may actually be cultural landscapes, forests shaped by selective planting, soil management, and long-term human presence. Over time, as populations declined, those managed systems continued to function on their own, blending seamlessly into what we now perceive as untouched wilderness. In that sense, the forest is not just nature reclaiming land, it's nature continuing a process that humans helped initiate. What's remarkable is how resilient that process appears to be. Even after centuries of abandonment, the infrastructure beneath the canopy still retains its form. Roads remain straight, platforms remain elevated, water channels still follow their engineered paths. The forest didn't erase the system, it preserved it. That resilience adds another layer to the story. It suggests that these societies didn't just survive in the Amazon, they integrated themselves into it in ways that endured long after they were gone. And that endurance raises difficult questions about how we define progress. If complexity can exist without leaving obvious ruins, if sustainability can be achieved without industrial tools, if large populations can thrive without overwhelming their environment, then perhaps our definitions need updating. It also reframes the role of modern technology in archaeology. Tools like Lidar don't just help us find lost sites, they change what kinds of questions we're able to ask. Instead of focusing on isolated locations, researchers can now analyze entire regions at once, spotting patterns that only make sense at scale. This shift from site-based archaeology to landscape archaeology is still unfolding, and the Amazon may be one of its most important testing grounds. Because if such extensive systems could remain hidden here, there's reason to believe similar discoveries await elsewhere, in jungles, wetlands, and regions previously written off as marginal, not because people weren't there, but because we weren't looking in the right way. This discovery doesn't claim to rewrite all of history. It doesn't suggest lost empires or forgotten superpowers. What it does is quieter and arguably more important. It adds nuance. It shows that human societies are more adaptable than we often give them credit for, that intelligence doesn't always take the same form, and that absence of visible ruins is not the same as absence of organization. Most importantly, it reminds us that history is incomplete by default. Every generation works with the tools it has, and every new tool reveals what previous ones could not, which means the story is never finished. The Amazon still holds vast stretches of unscanned land. Beneath that canopy may lie more roads, more settlements, more evidence of systems we haven't yet recognized. Not because they're mythical or mysterious, but because they're subtle, and subtlety is easy to miss. So as research continues, and as technology keeps peeling back layers of the landscape, one thing becomes increasingly clear. The past is not as simple as it once seemed. It's layered, distributed, contextual, and sometimes it's been right there all along, waiting patiently for us to learn how to see it. The Amazon is no longer just a symbol of untouched nature. It's also a record of human ingenuity, written into the landscape itself. Thanks to new technology and careful research, we're beginning to see a more complete picture of the past, one that replaces assumptions with evidence. And this discovery raises a larger question. If advanced societies could remain hidden for centuries beneath the forest, what other chapters of human history are still waiting to be revealed? In the next video, we'll look deeper into how LiDAR is reshaping archaeology worldwide and what it may uncover next.